all of our panelists. We have, as you can see, a full panel. So I'm just going to get straight into the questions so we can get to hear what stock exchanges are doing in this important role that they play together with us. So I'm going to start actually in South Africa. I'm going to go to Shameela Subramoni, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, Shameela, we haven't seen each other for 1 year since the last COP. And then we were discussing, you're starting to develop guidance at that point on sustainability reporting, disclosure, and climate disclosure particularly. And since then, you've launched that guidance too, and they've received an award for that guidance as well. They got a Thought Innovation Leadership Award from Environmental Finance. So with that in mind, and that JSE was also the co-chair of the SSE Advisory Group on climate action, what motivated the project to guide your market on this topic, and how has your market responded to that guidance? Thanks, Shameela.
Tiffany, great to be here. So the guidance was motivated.
Sorry, Shameela,
things.
We can't hear you super well. Can you just speak as loudly as possible?
I will try and speak. The guidance was motivated predominantly by two things. The first one was an absolute need that we were seeing from the market in relation to the emerging standards, frameworks, and what was quite a seemingly confusing landscape in relation to framework standards, reporting, ratings, all of those sorts of things. And we're a market that I think firstly is located where the sustainability challenges are front and center. When we talk about social issues, we talk about environmental issues, South Africa has them all. And our market, so from a reporting perspective, you know, one could argue our market's actually been fairly advanced comparatively up to now. But the increasing confusion at the pace of change that we've seen in the last 2 years has been apparent. So we realize that there's a strong kind of, a top level, higher market cap companies that know this quite well, but there's a whole tail after that that is facing pressure, from investors, civil society, that they've suddenly felt the sort of upsurge of in the last short period of time. So I was getting increasing requests for what do we need to do, how do we need to think about this, and seeing the exchange as a kind of a neutral party, a confidant of sorts. So we said, how can we help? And how do we not create confusion in this already confused space? So that's what we did. We created a sustainability disclosure guidance that really tried to help them understand this landscape, some of the confusing terminology, ESG, sustainability and the like. What does that mean? And context-based understanding. Also to move away from a sort of an ESG tick box risk management approach towards an impacts and outcomes focused approach, which we saw as the direction of travel that we would need to go to. And so that was really the basis and what we tried to achieve. And then the other driver was, of course, just saying to ourselves that the success of the exchange is directly linked to those companies listed on it and that market in which it operates. And so if we're not going to do something to step up and try and create a more resilient market, then really what is our purpose? And so that's where the guidance project came from. It was done in super fast speed, I think, but has been well received. And what it's also done, we're hoping, is democratize information sharing on sustainability. And we're hoping that within a company, be it your CFO or your, the first entry-level kind of employee, is able to pick up that document and understand very quickly the broad framework context in which they need to think about sustainability, both behavior and practice. So that's where it's come from, Tiffany, and we're very glad we got there.
Great, and quickly, what was the response from your market?
Both from the initial consultation period on our exposure draft, and then finally when it was launched, it's been very positively received. We have a number of companies now saying, this makes sense, we understand what to do. We also understand how all those different frameworks fit together, what we need to consider depending on what our audience is, our jurisdiction. So we've got a lot of very favorable response, but also interestingly, a divergence between opinions saying, we like this, we like the indicators you're giving us as a baseline. Some people saying it's too much, others saying not enough, and why is this not mandatory? So very interesting divergence of opinions, but the uptake in terms of saying we're finding this useful and it's going to help us set us on the right trajectory to get up and going has been overwhelmingly positive.
Great, thanks so much, Shameela. I'm going to pick up on what you said there with our market participants said this helps us understand how to pull all these frameworks together, which is really an important phase we're in now with the International Sustainability Standards Board. So I want to come to Jingdong, who's the vice chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board with the IFRS. And it's a big year. Last year you announced the ISSB. This year we've had a ton of announcements, including in that is the creation of the partnership framework with the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges as a founding partner of that. And we've also seen partnerships with EFRAG and the European Commission and CDP. So we're seeing a lot of partnerships now and a lot of consolidation in the market. So what is the next step for ISSB, and how can exchanges do their part in this?
Well, indeed, ISSB is a baby, 1 year old, but it's already started working, probably will run very soon. I joined a month ago, but before I get into the topic, let me say that I had the honor of ringing the opening bell in so many stock exchanges, Lagos, Joburg for the first green South African rand bond, Lusaka, Luxembourg, Singapore, of course, London Stock Exchange, where we led a lot of green bond. When I was the treasurer of the World Bank, we issued the largest sustainable development bond for COVID, $8 billion, listed on Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So stock exchange plays a critical role of connecting global savings to climate financing. So the great work you're doing, I just wanted to salute you. But stock exchange is one thing, global standard is equally important, because only by having a global standard, investors would know how to make a better investment decision, right? This is where ISSB's work in putting sustainability matters into every company's mandatory disclosure will significantly improve information sharing, capital allocation. So I think the combination of regulated mandatory standard through the powerful role a trusted stock exchange plays, these two will work together in unlocking global flows for climate financing. Now, one thing I wanted to say is that a true global standard would not be true if 90% is adopted in the global north, only 10% adopted in the global south. Therefore, we are putting capacity building for the global south as an integral part of our commitment, so that the gap between readiness and now is something we will work together to do. And indeed, thank you so much for being a funding partner in supporting our capacity building program. This is really to make sure the global south will be ready when our standard come out for climate for general requirements sometime next year. That in that process, we will be supporting global south to get ready. The sooner global south adopts those standards, the sooner through the stock exchange, more climate financing and private sector investment can be attracted to the global south.
Thank you so much for that. And let's unpack a bit what we mean by capacity building. So we have been working together with stock exchanges now for about a year on capacity building specifically, where we're helping them to train their markets on disclosure, climate disclosure more specifically. So in the last year, we've worked with 55 stock exchanges around the world. We've done 200 hours of training, and we've trained 15,000 people on what it means to disclose information aligned with the TCFD recommendations and the ISSB coming in. I think this is huge what stock exchanges are doing, and one of our partners was the New York Stock Exchange, part of ICE, and I have to say, I do these trainings myself.
Hello?
I think they're all off. Hello? Got another microphone.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello. Okay, good. We're back on. So, capacity building. We've done a ton of it. We worked with the New York Stock Exchange. And they had that question. I don't think it's working. We're going to have to speak, so I'll invite
I don't know.
Stand up.
Wait. No, it's better. We're back on. I'm not going to be able to shout that loud.
Hello? We're back on. Okay. Okay. So I'm standing now.
Yeah.
I'll stay standing. So with this capacity building, we worked with the New York Stock Exchange, and the questions came flowing in like I've never experienced before. They were asking us very specific, very targeted questions. This comes as a result of stock exchanges starting to provide that basic information that they can then build on and ask us, what is a scenario analysis? How do I measure my scope 3 emissions? What does that look like in my report? And so I wanted to come to the New York Stock Exchange and ICE, and Elizabeth is the president of Sustainable Finance and the chief regulatory officer at the Intercontinental Exchange Group. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of a stock exchange in evolving to support with these changing disclosures? And how are you going to assist companies through this process?
Okay. Thank you for that. And also, I did hear the question. You sent it to me ahead of time too, so that helped. But thank you very much, and to the Sustainable Stock Exchange for offering that training to our listed companies. We have 2,400 listed companies at the New York Stock Exchange who are all at varying places in their development of their ESG strategies. And some of the things that we do in terms of providing tools, training, and education are critical to helping our listed companies as they progress through their journey. The TCFD, you offered, there were two different sessions that were offered, and we had almost 400 people that attended the first one and almost 250 people that attended the second. So there's clearly demand for that type of training. In addition to that type of thing, we offer best practices for our webinar sessions for our listed companies. ICE has an ESG company database with where we track 10,000 companies and in their as-reported data, and this is something we offer to our listed companies so that they can see how their data appears next to their peers. We've had in-person ESG roundtable sessions. We've subsidized some ESG support services that are offered by our partners, including a board climate-ready training program that's offered through Diligent, and most recently something we're excited about is with Syndio. It's a workplace equity pay solution. We have a number of kind of one-on-one training sessions for the boards of early stage companies to share their best practices. So these are companies that are really pre-IPO and not listed yet. And another area that is something that I'm excited to be able to chair as part of my role at ICE is the NYSE's Board Advisory Council, which isn't focused on climate, but it's focused on the need to provide more diversity at the board level. So we have a council of CEOs from the companies that list with us, and a database of about 300 recommended diverse directors or candidates. So companies, either listed companies or companies that we're talking to about listing, can come to us, to our database, to see if there are qualified candidates as they refresh their boards. And then finally, I do want to mention an exciting product that called Natural Asset Companies, which is really more, in addition to the listed company services that I just outlined, as a capital market, we're working with a group called the Intrinsic Exchange Group, which has developed an accounting system for natural assets. These are natural assets such as biodiversity, the systems that really make the life on Earth possible. And it's an equity instrument that we're working with the SEC to develop listing standards so that companies that own or license the rights to these ecosystem services can list on the exchange, and investors who want to invest and support the maintenance and development of these natural assets can invest in.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And it looks like we're online again now. So I'm going to shift a little bit from training and education and guidance to the financial mechanisms that stock exchanges can help put in place and the infrastructure in markets. And I want to talk a little about voluntary carbon markets. So since last year at COP, it was a big monumental movement with Article 6 in the Paris Agreement and starting to understand how voluntary carbon markets can contribute to our shift to net zero. And at this COP, we just had a big announcement. Ahmed just moved from another session over there with the Prime Minister of Egypt, where they were launching Egypt's first VCM. So congratulations to the Egyptian Stock Exchange and all your hard work, Ahmed, on that. Ahmed Roshdy is the Manager of Risk Management and Sustainability at the Egyptian Stock Exchange. And I'd like to ask you a question about this VCM, if I can. So what do you hope that this new market in Egypt will do for the country? And what types of products and projects do you see this market contributing to help the real economy in Egypt?
Thank you, Tiffany, for the introduction. Okay. Thanks for the introduction. Actually, we know that it's time for exchange to move into the voluntary carbon market. Voluntary carbon market has been there like 20 years, but it's not regulated exchanges. But it's time for exchanges to intervene, because we know actually that exchanges have always a crucial role in tackling the climate finance, okay, and sustainability issues, okay. So what EGX actually done is the announcement of the official voluntary carbon market, the African voluntary carbon markets. It's not an Egyptian one. It's from Egypt to Africa, because actually we know that the total emission of African continent is like 4% only of the global emission, and it's better to have a centralized hub for carbon trading in Africa. We don't need to have multiple voluntary carbon exchanges in each country, but a well-regulated voluntary carbon market being a hub for Africa will be doing its role good. Actually, the Egyptian government realized the importance of climate change, okay, and embedded the innovation and enhancing the financial climate change infrastructure in its national climate change strategy 2050, which is launched early this year, okay, with the fourth pillar enhancing the climate finance infrastructure. And the voluntary carbon market is one of these of the proposed tool to enhance the climate finance tools. What actually we would like to see the voluntary carbon market doing in the for Egypt and for the African market actually is to help in achieving the indices. Number one, okay, because actually we know that the about 83% of the announced indices, okay, stated that they will use the carbon market and carbon trading, okay, and having an African hub for the carbon trading in Egypt will maintain and will help in achieving the national indices, okay. This is the first one. Second one, actually, we believe that a well-designed VCM can drive the economic and environmental and social benefits to the host country and to the region, and accelerating and enhancing the mitigation ambitions by creating standardized mitigation. At the Egyptian level, the indices actually consist of three main sectors. The electricity one, with a reduction of 33% compared to baseline scenario. The oil and gas with 65% reduction in the emission, and finally the transport sector and transportation by 7%. All these three sectors have a list of proposed projects I believe that the voluntary carbon market can accelerate in achieving this project. And finally, because we are targeting and aiming to have an African carbon market, we need a comprehensive, conducive regulations for the African carbon credits to ensure integrity of the carbon credits, to ensure safety and managing the trading risk of the carbon credits, and finally, to make sure that the voluntary carbon market is doing its role in climate finance.
Great, thank you so much. And a key there was really regulation and regulating the markets. And so I want to come to our regulator over here, if I can. Mark Manning is a technical specialist in sustainable finance at the UK FCA, or Financial Conduct Authority. And really, the UK has been taking a leadership role lately, and specifically we've seen that in TCFD and integrating climate disclosure into our regulatory mandatory requirements in a market. Now, how can regulators both encourage and support companies in this transition to net zero, and what is the role of regulation in the development of such innovative climate solutions?
Thank you very much indeed. Great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate the opportunity. So I'd just like to start with a little bit of a sort of philosophy for regulation in this area. At the end of the day, we very much see that financial regulation can be an enabler here. It can be a force for good. It can help to embed, accelerate, and channel market-based initiatives, and it can provide the guardrails that will enable markets to grow, to innovate, and to ultimately help us deliver on positive change. And the net zero challenge is quite a unique one. It's urgent, it's outsized, and it's unprecedented. So to that extent, as regulators, we need to be quite creative in the way in which we approach this, and we need to be very outcome-oriented. And I'd highlight three approaches really here. First of all, we need to be more collaborative than perhaps we have been in other parts of financial regulation. We're taking a very open approach at the FCA. We're doing more pre-consultation than perhaps we have traditionally done. We're using our convening powers quite extensively to bring together expertise from across all parts of the market and from civil society and from academia, etc., providing mutual support and co-creating solutions where appropriate. And with the market still evolving and with the need for that innovation, we need to get the balance right between principles and prescription. The second point that I'd like to highlight in terms of our approach is the need to find global solutions to global problems. And we've already heard from Jingdong about the fantastic work that the ISSB are doing here. We're very, very strong supporters of the work towards a global baseline. And we're looking at global solutions more broadly in our engagement with other regulators and with IOSCO in particular. And I'm wearing two hats today. One is FCA, one is IOSCO. And we're doing a huge amount of work with the IOSCO Sustainable Finance Task Force, which I'll come back to in a moment. And then I think the third area is the need to take a systems thinking approach here. We need to understand how the various pieces of the jigsaw fit together. We need to understand who needs to influence whom. I know, Steve, you've probably got things to say about that as well. And ultimately, we need to understand the interconnections across the ecosystem, the roles of exchanges, the roles of data providers, fintechs, assurance and professional service providers all have incredibly important roles to play in ensuring that we can actually deliver on the transition here. We have supported two particular initiatives that have been launched here at COP this week. Just prior to this panel, I was at the launch panel for the Transition Plan Task Force, and this is a disclosure framework for transition planning that ultimately aims to deliver the information that investors and lenders and other market participants need in order to assess and hold companies to account for their transition plan strategies. And second, IOSCO is launching today its excellent work on carbon markets, and this speaks particularly to the VCM that we were discussing in the previous intervention. The responsible use of carbon credits can be an important complement to companies' direct emissions reduction, especially in hard-to-abate sectors. And so IOSCO's work emphasizes the important role of exchanges in supporting these solutions and the role of regulation in ensuring that these markets scale with integrity. So voluntary carbon markets are currently small, they're currently largely unregulated, but they use financial markets to price and then to transfer capital to the projects that create the credits. And so IOSCO's report highlights a number of areas in which we need to take further steps to improve the integrity as these markets grow. And these include concerns at the point of issuance around environmental integrity, around carbon credit quality, around potential double counting. They include concerns in the trading environment around the current lack of standardization and data quality. And then in the actual use of the credits themselves and how users communicate how they're using them as part of their transition strategies. So regulation has a critically important role to play in dealing with all of those integrity concerns at each point in the chain. And we very much look forward to working with the exchange community as IOSCO and as securities regulators around the world to ensure that these markets can indeed deliver on their promise. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. I'm going to build on that IOSCO announcement and come back to the voluntary carbon markets because we have with us today Owain Johnson, Global Head of Research and Product Development at the CME Group. And Owain has become our expert on VCMs, and we have many calls with Owain about how these can be an important infrastructure for good for climate. So I want to build on that expertise a little bit, and can you share with everybody here with us today, can you explain to them how you foresee voluntary carbon markets playing a role in this transition to a net zero economy and to a more sustainable financial system more broadly?
It's a challenge. It is a challenge. So thank you, everyone. We host the voluntary carbon markets futures product. So some of you might be wondering, what has futures got to do with voluntary carbon? What's derivatives got to do with voluntary carbon? The answer is, imagine the risk needs of a project developer. So a project developer is going out to a developing country, creating credits, but he does not know what the price will be at the time that his project is complete. How can he be sure of getting profitability? How can he borrow money from a bank to develop? That's where the futures market comes in. He can see a forward curve. He can lock in a price that makes his project profitable. On the other side of the spectrum, imagine that you work for a company where your CEO has made a net zero commitment. Fantastic. But the CFO does not know at what price he will be buying those voluntary carbon credits in 3 or 5 or 10 years' time. So again, the other side of that is the buyer that needs to come to the futures market to lock in a price that allows them to meet that commitment while still staying in business. Because the voluntary carbon prices have risen a lot in recent years and they're quite volatile. So if you imagine a primary market of certificates, like the one Ahmed's launching with the EGX, which is great to see, that's where people are trading the certificates. But what they're doing on our exchange is trading the futures. Now, why is that useful? Gets you credit with the banks because they can see a forward curve. Gets you credit with your investors because they can see what the cost of your net zero commitment is. So we're really trying to provide that price transparency and that ability to lock in prices that keeps the voluntary carbon market moving, keeps everybody in business so that we don't have these booms and busts with people going bankrupt that we've seen in previous incarnations. So the final thing I'll say about that is There's been a fantastic response to this tool. I would say it's probably one of the fastest growing commodity products we've launched in the last 10 to 20 years. And that tells me that there is a great hunger for voluntary carbon, but also for visibility, for transparency, for forward risk management. So we just crossed the 100 companies level last month, and that's split 40 European, 40 US, 20 Asian at this point. So it tells you it's a very global market. You made that point before. I would say Asia is the fastest growing part of that. So to the point about the global south that Shameela made, we are seeing that global south participate more and more actively. Very fast growing, lots of transparency, very exciting market.
Thanks so much, Owain. And so this voluntary carbon market is really linked directly to our net zero targets, as Owain just mentioned. And so let's talk a little bit about net zero targets, because it seems to be a key word today here at COP. And I'm going to start off with congratulating actually a new member of the, it's an acronym here, so I'm going to spell it out, the Net Zero Finance Service Providers Alliance. Whoever wasn't at COP last time or maybe isn't aware of this space, at last COP we launched the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, and underneath that we have the Alliance for Financial Service Providers, and stock exchanges fit within that, and the SSE has been working very hard with stock exchanges to set their targets. Lisa's done a lot of work on this. And we just had an announcement this morning of 2 new members joining this alliance. So we have Deutsche Börse Group and CBOE that just joined this morning. And we have today with us Christina Sell from the Deutsche Börse Group, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer. So Christina, I'd just like to know from you, now that you're in this alliance, you're not only making your exchange more aligned to a net zero target, but you're helping your companies to do this too. What is the tools that you're using, and how are you helping companies to do this?
Yeah, so I think we all agree that we have to reach net zero, but we have, as an exchange or as an infrastructure provider, we have to make sure that every investor can use his own way. And therefore we start in the pre-trading area with transparency services. So ISS, for example, is one of our is a global and leading ESG data provider and rating provider. And we have also Contigo there, a company that creates indices. When it comes to the trading space, we offer different markets. And for example, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange offers ETFs, ESG ETFs, our Eurex derivatives exchange offers respective derivatives, and we also try to enhance also the post-trade area with ESG metrics, so that really every investor can make informed decisions and really individual decisions. And we have, of course, to ensure that we follow the current developments and produce new services, and this also includes new asset classes. So voluntary carbon markets is just one of them, and we can also think of, might be biodiversity, one of the next asset classes, just as an example. And of course, we also have to support the issuers with transparency services. So we launched around 1 year ago our so-called Visibility Hub, where issuers can upload their own ESG reporting. And of course, we need to support smaller issuers with templates, with guidelines. And last but not least, we also support startups. This is very close to our heart, because this might be the next big bang.
Great, thanks, Christina. So that's very interesting too, to see the SME side of it as well too, where this new innovation is going to come from. So speaking of innovative, one of the leaders in this movement, SGX, the Singapore Exchange, was one of the first members of this alliance. And Harry Cho, who's also the group head sustainability and sustainable finance at the Singapore Exchange, was with us last year at COP as well, and we were discussing similar topics. But since then, you've been very busy, and you've been working with Lisa and the whole advisory group on setting targets for stock exchanges and what net zero looks like for stock exchanges. So why do you see this transition as such an important activity for an exchange to be involved in, and what more can exchanges do?
Thanks for that. Well, frankly speaking, the financial system won't be able to move in the public markets, equity markets, debt markets, derivatives markets, carbon markets, if exchanges don't play ball. So what we've been working very hard in the last 1 year was trying to come up with a definition and those key targets as to what exchanges should be doing. You know, what does that mean for the governance? What does it mean for our product space? What does it mean in terms of education and engagement, etc.? And one of the key things that many of the exchanges have been talking about here is actually coming up with aligning the financial system, right? Financial system so that there are services, there are products on offer that the ecosystem can use and adopt. So without the exchanges, in our view, that's going to be a difficult, and so we also have to play our part. Some examples that we can give. I mean, obviously the bonds have been one of the key instruments over the years in greening this system and funding and financing some of these key projects. These are some of the fastest growing in Asia as well. So we have, for example, 20% of all of our issuances in the last 1 year have been green, social, sustainability linked. That's 20% in Asia Pacific, and that's quite a large sum, and 360 bonds as well. So the financing flow we continue to see there. The other key word that we're seeing is transition, and it's important to when we talk about net zero transition, especially coming from the global south and serving a market that is global south, how do we practically translate this so that we keep the ambition high, but knowing that not everyone can move at the same pace? And so how do we come up with supporting of transition plans, whether that be the financing flow? So for example, we've just agreed on a partnership with MSCI and came up with a new index family called Climate Action Index by MSCI, working together with them, that is created to be inclusive and looking on a global basis and inclusive of sectors that are hard to abate as well, including energy on a global basis. So to utilize these kind of methodologies across different asset classes is going to be very important. And of course, the regulatory lever that some of the exchanges have to play, of course, we have to encourage companies, but sometimes it is helpful and necessary for the market, for the exchanges to set some level of baseline, and that will also stimulate and sort of put up the best practice for the non-listed companies as well.
Thanks so much, Harry. Always inspirational. And yes, a lot of work has been done, but there's still a lot more to do for sure. And I'm going to pick up on that word that you mentioned, a transition. I think that's definitely something that everybody's starting to struggle with a little bit and figure out how they create their transition plans and how do we transition all together as our economy shifts. And we have with us an exchange that's already got some experience with some transition plans. I want to come to the London Stock Exchange Group. We have with us Claire Dorrian, who's the head of sustainable finance at LSEG. And just to wrap up kind of what all the exchanges have said here, the London Stock Exchange Group is also involved in all of this work. They were a co-chair also on our SSE advisory group on climate action, also a participant on our SSE advisory group on net zero, and a member of the Alliance for Financial Sector Net Zero, financial service providers for net zero. There's a lot of acronyms to keep up with now. So I'm going to come to you, Claire, just to wrap up. What are your plans at LSEG to support this transition with companies, and how is LSEG handling that themselves as a stock exchange?
Thanks, Tiffany. Actually, can I first of all start with two thank yous. One, actually, thank you to the UNSSC, because actually I think you do such great work tirelessly bringing together all of us as exchanges. You know, we're really different businesses, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And thank you also to sitting me next to our regulator to keep me honest in my answers. Oh, sorry, my friendly regulator, I should have added. Look, I think I just would like to sort of share with you some of the initiatives. Well, one initiative that we did last year that's really sort of coming into play and very fruitful in terms of how we're interacting with our issuers, and then two on the roadmap and what we're doing. I mean, notwithstanding the fact, actually, probably I should first add that we are all different businesses as exchanges, and we aren't just the London Stock Exchange. The G means something. We are the group, and that is beyond an exchange. We are a data and infrastructure provider. So we have within our business, we sit on the Net Zero Financial Services Providers Alliance in 3 ways. So I'm part of it as the exchange working group, but we have a big presence through our data business because we had a transaction with Refinitiv, so the Heritage Thomson Reuters business, and also FTSE Russell with index and data there. So, you know, we look at this sort of sustainability space in quite a different lens because we have, you know, a vast depths of access to data and information that can support on the exchange business. And I think what we've been doing over the last year is really leveraging those capabilities for our listed companies and also private companies as well. So notwithstanding the fact as well that you need capital markets and you need a variety of offerings. You need a fixed income offering and green bonds, social bonds, sustainability linked bonds, etc. You need, you know, renewable energy funds and green funds to be able to list. We recognise some of the companies on our markets by identifying them through providing a green economy mark to those that are demonstrating that they can show that their revenues are 50% or more are coming from green environmental products and services. But I think, you know, what we need to do as exchanges is go beyond having just a capital market and a financing. You know, we've heard a lot about how we can be conveners between investors, between the corporates, and we can leverage the data and products and services. I'm going to have to talk louder, aren't I? So one of the things that we did last year, just ahead of COP, was we launched a climate transition offering. And what that means is, it's threefold really. It was one that we launched our own climate transition and climate guidance for issuers, and that was building on the work that we've done with the UNSSE and other exchanges. We also, hopefully, a lot of those numbers that you talked about on the training were the listed companies on the London market, because we were very active in doing in that, and that will become sort of an annual occasion for us, because I think it's really important that we do help to support those companies on their journey. We've got businesses in different sectors, different sizes, that at different stages of their journey. And then we also launched what's called a climate governance score, which is building on some of the Transition Pathway Initiative data, and being able to provide companies with an understanding about, you know, how investors are looking at them from a sort of a climate risk assessment perspective, and a management quality score. So companies have that available in a private capacity to be able to understand where they are positioned and where they can move to as well, because I think that's what's important. And then just briefly touching on what are we doing now, and you know, and what are the things that we need to be looking forward for. Definitely voluntary carbon markets. That's there. And those of you who didn't see it, on the 10th of October, we announced at the London Stock Exchange that we were launching a new voluntary carbon market designation. So we've looked at it in a different way, perhaps, to some of the other exchanges and other market participants. So a lot of looking at the trading, this sort of end, the trading of the carbon credits. We've actually gone in at the beginning side of finance. How can you get finance into these projects that are going to be delivering carbon credits in the future? How can we address the supply side? And that's what exchanges do well. We provide good marketplaces to be able to bring together those that need finance. So we looked at it and thought, actually, what we can do is to create the the admission and disclosure standards that will sit alongside the listing rules with the FCA or the AIM admission rules, and enable carbon funds or operating companies to be able to list on the London capital markets and meet the designation rules, which are linked to what is happening in the VCM ecosystem. So we know they've got to meet certain project standards. You need to be having a lot of disclosure around the carbon yield and the SDGs that are being met. So the underlying objective here is all about disclosure, so that investors know what they're investing in. So we launched that the designation and the admission disclosures, as I said, just in October, and we hope to now sort of see that once that gets embedded into the market, and all the lawyers and accountants and banks have looked at it, that we'll start to see some funds using this as a route to be able to finance those climate mitigation projects. And also, the investors, this provides all a new opportunity for investors as well. We've heard a lot about how residual emissions and how do you address that, and maybe look at carbon credits. And this is a way in which we can do it. And I think I probably need to finish because we're running short and we need to leave time for Steve. But I think the other key thing is data. And I think we've got to make sure that we expand data and access to and distribution to investors. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. And I'm sure Steve will agree on the data point for sure. But stock exchanges, as you mentioned, have multiple hats. And stock exchanges are working together with the whole financial system. And it's really a systems approach that is needed, as was mentioned. So who better to speak to us about a systems approach than Steve Waygood? Steve Waygood is Chief Responsible Investment Officer at Aviva Investors. But also he's played numerous roles in all the different sides of this financial. He's worked on the investor side, of course, but also he's part of the SSE from the beginning, really. He's also worked on it from the insurance side and the banking side. So I'd like to just give you the hardest task here now, Steve. And in your short amount of time you have left, I'd like you to kind of provide us that systems perspective. Can you tell us what is it that we need to achieve these targets we're sitting out for? What's missing in this systems approach?
Thank you, Tiffany. And you've spent a lot of time introducing other people here, and I just want to say to you, thank you for your leadership. It's been amazing, and congratulations as you near the end of your PhD, which looks amazing. Thank you for the insight to it. So I think, can we just pause? Warm congratulations, brilliant chairing, awesome work, awesome work. So what gives me hope is the last 14 years, all the work on stock exchanges that you've all been doing. The data is now much, much better. It also gives me hope that IOSCO is showing real public leadership now in this debate. And most now institutions within the international financial architecture, not just exchanges, but the regulators of pensions, the regulators of insurers, the Financial Stability Board, and so on. Most of those institutions now have some programs on climate, which is great, okay? Reality check. None of it's anywhere near enough. All the exchanges here, actually, let me correct that. Most of the exchanges here will be between 2.5 and 3.5 degrees. At 3 degrees, 3/4 of the world's population can't live where they do today. So that's where we're heading, not 1.5 or 2. What do we need to do to change that? One, we need an effective carbon price that's at least what the IMF has set out at $75. We also need to harness the entire international financial architecture, the regulatory and supervision system for banking, insurance, and investment, not just exchanges, but all the users of exchanges and the intermediaries. And we need to rethink the financial architecture, none of which was designed to deal with the Paris Agreement. And we need to put it on a new footing. Otherwise, finance will collapse because the natural ecological consequences of what we will see in the physical risk will mean that our insurance becomes unaffordable in most of our products. Would you buy your home insurance if it was 3% of your house price? So what does that do to mortgages? So finance will collapse at a certain point. We don't know where yet, but quite possibly where we're heading, 3 degrees, okay? So harnessing the financial architecture, we have an opportunity in 2024, and in 30 seconds, G20 will be hosted by Brazil under Lula. Let's get the finance track to Bretton Woods. Get back to Bretton Woods. Maybe COP29 will be hosted by Australia. We'll hear about that soon. But if that's true, we've also got a government there that gets this and gets how urgent it is and has physical evidence of what it does on the ground. So we have actually just under 2 years to build a Bretton Woods 2 that harnesses the entire international financial architecture to manage a smooth and just transition to net zero by 2050. And we could do that. We could do that. There's over $500 billion of assets in the market. If we don't, we're not going to deliver Paris. There'll still be a transition, but it will be chaotic, and it will be led by Gaia, and we don't want that because it's chaos.
Great, thanks everyone. We need to wrap it up now. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks so much for the UNFCCC team for hosting us again this year. We hope to see you next year. Take care, everyone. Thanks.